All right, how's it going? I'm Josh from Modestep, and I'm going to run through with you guys one of the bass sounds that I made for our song Out on Disciple called The Fallout.
This is just a fallout.
So it's that sound there, that kind of like low, reverberous, metallic sounding womp, this sound here. So the technique that I use to make this sound is actually a technique that I use when I'm starting most of my sounds from scratch. And yeah, I'm just gonna run through it now. I'll remove all of the effects on here and we'll start from the beginning. Let's do that. So I'm going to duplicate it, and then, so we've still got the MIDI, and I'm going to turn these guys off, and then initialize the serum patch. Boom. All right, so this is what it sounds like with the init sound. Fire. Right, let's load in the wavetables that we had. I think the first one was this Seltsam, and then the second one was this Comb Party one. So the wavetables alone sound like this, which does not sound anything like the final patch, but we'll get there. So the way that I deal with my sounds is LFO1 I tend to use for like volume and filter shaping. And LFO2 I use for wavetable positioning. And the reason I use them on different LFOs is you can get some cool effects when the LFOs aren't the same, but it also means that even if you are keeping them the same, you can quite easily edit the patch and make it sound totally different just by modifying one of the LFOs instead of having to go through and change a whole bunch of things in the patch. So what I'll do is I'll start with the volume shaping. I tend to put it on the level of each oscillator, and I'll set this one to FM from B, throw it on there as well. Turn the filter on. I think for this one I used HP12. I'll put the envelope on there also, kind of nice and in the low register. Turn up the res, and also do a little notch here towards the top. So far it's sounding like this. Kind of getting there, getting towards the sound. Okay, and then LFO2 is our wavetable shape LFO. So let's make a shape like this and throw it on this one. And this one. Okie doke. Let's get to the effects. So I use for this the first of all the distortion set to tube, and I'll throw this bad boy on there. So it's the drive is at its highest point during the highest point of the LFO, and also with the mix. So it's only being introduced into the sound at these high points as well. And then I throw the multi-band compressor on, and also like to do a bit of extra movement here on the gain, because you tend to lose a bit of your level movement on these oscillators here once you throw a big compressor on it. So I like to then make it up again by throwing it on the gain at the end. Let's have a listen. We're getting there, and the last ingredient here is EQ, which I'm going to be using for some extra filtering. In the low range again, throw the Q up a bit. That sounds about right. And then an extra notch here as well. And then I also like to add unison turn down the random to the patch. The random is there so that when you're making a unison sound, instead of them phasing out with each other, they make the sound slightly different every time in each one of the voices. I tend to turn that down if I'm trying to get a really phasey sounding patch, because they obviously, each one of the voices in the unison will phase with itself and create a very unique and metallic sounding sound, which is what I was after with this. So let's pull up those D tunes. And you see that the more that I mess with this D tune, the different phasing effects you get. So let's change this final shape. And then I guess the last ingredient would be to add a reverb. So let's go for a doggy noise reverb. Okay. What I like to do is then automate in the reverb movement. So I hit A, and then here we go, like this. And that's probably a bit extreme, so if we just turn down the depth here, like that sounds pretty good. I've got a little rack that I built here with a bunch of OTTs, saturators, and some other little bits of magic, which I've made into some nice macros, but really all I'm going to add here is a tiny bit of distortion and drive, and in fact I'll probably add another little saturator here just before the reverb. Maybe 3 dB in, and then anything that I put into a saturator I like to take out afterwards, so minus 3 dB on the output, and then cut off the lows. And that should be, give or take, the sound that we made initially, that we wanted to make initially. And just to show you why I kind of go for this technique, if I wanted to swap something out, like make a completely different patch, all I need to do here is go to the second LFO and change the shape. Or I could add, for example, bend to the second oscillator. And then we have a totally different sound. And one last tip that I'll give is I tend to use the third or another oscillator to use almost like a step sequencer in this way, like this. So I'll attach the first LFO's rate to LFO number 3, and then if I set this to, say, a bar, you can then, let me check that this is good here, set this to from the note upwards, and then maybe not so much rate going on there. Yeah, all I can do is I can draw in different rates here, and if I set this to triplet and dot, so if you see, every time it's going up, it will increase the rate. And sometimes I'll just put random shapes in here and it creates totally different grooves. So that's also another way to create really randomized grooves within Serum. But yeah, I guess that's kind of where I start with my patches, and for this patch I feel like it was simple, but it did the job. Shows you don't really need too much complex stuff going on to make something really effective. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you'd like to download the patch, we'll have it in the description for this video. Thanks to Disciple for having me, and make sure you cop all of that merch, boy. There you go.
Bollocks. Well, that's it for another video from the Disciple YouTube channel. If you liked it, thumbs. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe for much more content like this coming very soon.
Run with the mic.